welcome to episode 102 of the Blood Brothers podcast. I'm flying lonesome this evening. Is that the term, flying lonesome? Doesn't sound quite right. But I'm joined by AJ West, who is the author of The Spirit Engineer, which was absolutely incredible. AJ, how are you?
Thank you. I'm great. We're recording this the night before the launch of my paperback, at which point I'll feel as though I've completed my Spirit Engineer journey in a way. It feels like, I don't know, after you've launched the hardback and then the paperback it takes so much less somehow. You're not really expected to do very much. But I feel as though I'm kind of neglecting my second child. And as a second child in the family, I know how that feels.
Yeah.
Like, oh, you're so excited about the first one and now you don't care.
And the beautiful thing about it is it's got a beautiful new jacket, doesn't it?
It really does. They've done a wonderful job. Duckworth are a kind of boutique publisher. They've been around for a couple of hundred years. They're amazing. One of the original independents, still independent.
Wow.
Yeah, they published D.H. Lawrence and I won't, so many brilliant authors of old. But no, they've really included me in the process, and they really they made me part of the process with the covers as well. I loved the hardback cover, which was black and red and very gothic, but we just felt it's gorgeous. But we just felt like it's a summer release, and also with the black and red, I think it made it turned off some historical fiction readers, and I found myself, I went on a tour around the whole of the UK, England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland in the autumn to visit lots of independent bookshops. And I just noticed when I was going into particularly Waterstones all over the country that it was being put with vampire stories a lot. And I was talking to booksellers and saying, do you know what? I love fantasy and dark fiction, but this is more kind of Sarah Waters Fingersmith or Sarah Waters Affinity than it is, a kind of dark horror read in Tooth and Claw. It's more psychological than that. So we're moving it more towards kind of general fiction now, because I think that's where it belongs. In fact, I saw with some of the reviews that expected kind of werewolves and vampires and things, they're almost disappointed that they weren't there,
Yeah.
So they've been really clever, I think, the way they've changed that cover.
Yeah, the white looks beautiful. One of the things that drew me, because it is there's so many books, aren't there? But the black and red really, really appealed to me. I think it's absolutely beautiful. But yeah, the white one's great as well. I think it might be one of the ones that I need both of for my shelves, actually.
I'd
really
love that.
nice.
They do look good together. It's a kind of one of my favorite books is Jekyll and Hyde, and it has that element to it with the two books, the dark hardback and the more innocent looking paperback.
Yeah.
And that is very relevant if you've read the story to William, the narrator's personal journey into some pretty shady places as the story progresses.
Yeah, and on that note, please can you tell us what the story is about?
So the story is based on a true story that I discovered when I was working for the BBC in Northern Ireland, of an engineering professor called William Jackson Crawford, who in the early 1900s was investigating a young spiritual medium by the name of Kathleen Gallagher. And he investigated her for 6 years, came to international prominence as an investigator of Scientology. And then his body was discovered on Picky Rocks in Bangor, just up the coast from Belfast, foaming at the mouth with an empty packet of potassium cyanide beside his discarded jacket. And he'd taken his own life in mysterious circumstances. Houdini wrote in his diary that having met William Jackson Crawford, he was certain that the professor had discovered he'd been fooled for 6 years, and that he simply couldn't handle that truth that he'd discovered, that Kathleen Gallagher was, after all, a false spirit medium. Arthur Conan Doyle, who was one of the great doyens of the spiritualist movement, he said, no, this was the professor's last greatest experiment. And when I discovered that true story, I thought, well, this is absolutely ripe for a novel. So it's my telling of that story through William Jackson Crawford's eyes.
Amazing. And how was it writing about real people? Did that have challenges, or did you feel limited, or were you sort of blank canvas?
I started writing the book having a very early confident sense as to who William Jackson Crawford was. His letters, his articles, there was an endearing kind of pomposity there in them, a sense that he was trying to convince us he absolutely knew what he was talking about, where it felt to me quite obvious that underneath it he was trying to convince himself as much as he was the reader, and that chimed with me because that's how I feel as I spent most of my life. So I had some sympathy for him. The more I found out about him and his story, there's some controversy there. There are some feminist academics over the decades who've used him as an example of men who have taken advantage of younger women, and who maybe have had a sexual reason for engaging in these experiments. That was certainly part of the scene back then. And you did have this 35-year-old professor investigating a 16-year-old girl who had very little agency at the time. It doesn't take a modern reader a great deal of imagination to think that there might be something inappropriate there. That being said, the more I looked into it, the more I thought, from my point of view, he had his own vulnerability. It seems more and more likely to me, although I really dislike retrospective diagnosis of psychological ailments and such, but it seems quite likely that he might have been on the spectrum, having shared his letters and his story with experts in the field. They say that it will be quite congruent. And his contemporaries described him as being socially quite awkward, quite uncomfortable in social situations, found public speaking terrifying, was an insanely intelligent man, but also an insanely, possibly insane man. And, in all sorts of different ways, his character I just found more and more interesting. He didn't become more likable. He just became more fascinating to me the more I found out about him. So writing about a real person just drew a character I absolutely wanted to live inside while I wrote the book. It was more difficult with Kathleen because I thought, well, I'm a man in my mid-30s when I started researching the book, and I felt as though I was almost doing again what William had done.
Yeah.
I was like, well, here I am, accusing this young woman of being a fraud, and picking apart her life and her motives and her psychology, having never met her. But the more I got to know her as a character, the more I thought she's much more robust than you might originally have imagined. She was clearly precocious. She was very intelligent. And I had the joy through my website, where I was publishing as I researched a lot of my research as I went along, of being contacted by her granddaughter who knew her, a living relative. When she was a girl, she would go to Kathleen Gallagher's house, and it was her granny, and she would be given bread and jam, and she spoke to me about her grandmother and really brought her back to life for me and confirmed exactly what I thought, which was this was a very intelligent woman who was very sure of her own mind. And I felt, well, as soon as I heard that, and as soon as I heard that her granddaughter was comfortable with me writing the book, I then felt confident enough to tell the story.
Amazing. And did you learn anything that went into the book from the granddaughter, or was there things that you weren't aware of or anything like that?
What went into the book about Kathleen was everything we don't know about Kathleen, and that's why I love her character. I was almost relieved that her granddaughter couldn't tell me very much, because Kathleen was so secretive. It was not spoken about. She never ever mentioned, oh, by the way, Houdini knew what I was doing when I was a teenage girl. By the way, I'm mentioned in 3 of Arthur Conan Doyle's books. By the way, I spent the 30 years of my life as, Ireland's most famous spirit mediums, and in fact, one of the world's most famous spirit mediums. And in fact, I kind of helped to invent ectoplasm. It just didn't ever come up. It was never mentioned. There was a box in the bottom of her wardrobe that had old photographs of spirits appearing above her head. Anyone who is au fait with spirit mediumship and the history of spiritualism will be able to imagine those photographs. We have this kind of looming balloon head in the smoky black and white pictures, super creepy. and some letters and some other bits and bobs that were at the bottom of the wardrobe, but they were never spoken about and they were hidden away. And even when she was told that she didn't have very long left and to, you know, get her affairs in order at the end of her life, there was no mention of religion on any front. There was no religiosity. There was no, don't worry, I know there's an afterlife. No sense of it's okay, my spirits are waiting for me, or can I tell you a story about this thing that happened with this guy in the 1920s? She did literally take her secrets really to the grave. And you ask what I bring to the book from the real Kathleen. It's exactly that. I do the opposite of what I think. I've never been taught how to be a writer. I've never done a course or, you know, studied it. But I believe you're told that you should be very certain who your character's voice is and what they look like and how they behave while you write them. Otherwise, the reader will struggle to get a sense of who they are. With Kathleen, I did the opposite. I thought actually, every single chapter, she's just a bit different. Her voice is different, her personality is different, her motivations are different, because I think that's how she seems to me. She is a really smoky, indistinct person, and I think that's exactly how she liked it. And I also think that's exactly why she was so clever and so successful as a spirit medium.
Yeah, amazing. And like you say, usually you get a great sense of character, but you almost got that, like you say, from not having that, almost in a very strange way. It really, really worked. Very cleverly done. Before you wrote the book, or heard about the story, did you have an interest in sort of spirit medium and things like that?
I guess I did. I mean, ever since I was a kid, I loved castles, even more so if I was told that there was meant to be a ghost there that threw themselves off the top turret at 2 o'clock every Sunday afternoon, or, you know, there's every single castle has to have that story, right? I remember going to Warwick Castle as a kid and being told that there was a face of a ghost in the fireplace, and I just stood and watched until the teachers like dragged me away, like, where have you been? We've all finished lunch. And I just stood and stared into this fireplace, willing this ghost to appear. I don't believe in ghosts, I don't believe in spirits, but I would give anything to see one, because it would answer so many questions for me in my life. If I could think for a moment that there's something after death, that would be a huge weight off my shoulder. I have two shoulders. But so I guess I have a morbid fascination with death, with mortality generally, and that's where it comes from. But it wasn't a subject that I'd studied in any vast detail. I'd watched and read a bit that Derren Brown has produced. I find Derren Brown fascinating always, and I was lucky enough, I wrote him a letter while I was researching saying, hey, I've uncovered this story, I don't think you've heard about it, but I hear you're interested in this stuff, and sent him some pictures, hand wrote him a letter and posted it off, like a kid sending off to Blue Peter in the 90s. It was very old fashioned, but I knew he was an old fashioned guy, and I thought you'll appreciate this. The email will go nowhere, but a letter stands a chance. And it was about 2 years later, right before the publication of the novel, I got an email from D, and it just said, hi, I've just found your letter. I'm really sorry that it's taken me this long to get back to you, but it is fascinating. I would love to hear more. Would you like to come to my house for tea? I thought, well, it can only be Derren Brown. But it was one of those moments where I just thought, it was because there was no nepotism, there was none of that. It was just literally me fanboying Derren Brown and then being asked to his for tea 2 years later when I'd given up all hope. And this book has been a story about kind of achieving life dreams against all hope and possibility from the start to the finish. And that's just one of many examples. So yeah, in a way, it sounds very, very corny to say it, but I do sometimes feel as though the story found me in the most random of ways, and just hasn't let go of me since. And the book has kind of demanded to exist against the will of pretty much every agent in the country, every publisher in the country, and my own psychological health.
Right. Okay. And we'll move on to that in one sec. But did you go to his house?
I did go to his house. which I don't think he'll be too embarrassed to say is huge. And as I turned up, they were laying a red carpet. And I just thought, normally I would cheesily make a joke about laying out the red carpet, but I can't because it's Darren Brown and I have to try and be cool. It's too obvious. And then I thought, well, he's probably just noticed through every twitch in my face and body and the way I'm holding myself that that's exactly the thought process I've gone through.
Yeah.
So even before I walked over the threshold, I was already completely second guessing every thought I had and thinking he was reading my mind, when actually all he was thinking, I think, was I hope this guy's not too weird and I hope he's not vegetarian, because there was a lot of salami.
Right, there you go. That's a good little insight. I reckon I would constantly be thinking he's doing something to me here, or he's invited me here for like some sort of thing.
Secret filming. I did wonder that. I was like, am I going to be tested now for the next kind of 6 months, and it'll be some part of some show? I'll have to sign a non-disclosure. But no, I don't think so, unless it's a very, very long project indeed.
Yeah. Oh man, that is very, very cool. And then going back to your sort of more pertinent point about I guess it links into the publication journey a little bit. And please, could you tell us a little bit about your build up to this? Did you want to be an author or all that kind of jazz?
Yeah, I always wanted to be a writer since I was a kid. The first kind of happy moment I have at school, because I didn't enjoy school at all. I was a very unpopular kid, not in the sense that I was beaten up. I was just ignored all the way through primary school. I didn't fit in as a little gay boy. I was probably a bit aloof, but that was a defense thing, really, because I just felt like an alien every day, just like embarrassed, really, of my body and my voice and my interests and everything, very uncomfortable. And so I'd spend all my time at school like a bit of a mouse. But I remember once we were asked to write about a little story about what we'd learned about ancient Egypt, and I wrote about Howard Carter discovering Tutankhamun's tomb. And my teacher, Mrs. Mayer, asked me to get up in front of the class and read it, and I was very scared. I used to wet myself constantly as well, just to give the bullies something else to hate me for. And I thought, I can't stand in front of the class. I can't. But I did. I read my story, and it was the first ever taste. It was a totally new concept to me. It was the first ever taste of my peers, my classmates, having respect for or saying something I'd done was good, or even noticing that I existed, frankly. Yeah. And I remember walking out and being patted on the back, saying, "Oh, that was really good. I really like that story. I love the way you wrote that. That was really good. You should write stories more." And I just remember growing 10 times the size, just feeling like I existed and that there was a purpose and I was good at something. My God, I'm actually good at something. And I'd never lost that feeling. I think that stuck with me all through my life. And like I say, I was a lonely kid. But I used to find friends in Wind of the Willows or Roald Dahl or whatever it was I was reading. I quite like some of the older children's books, to be honest. I know we're not meant to say that Enid Blyton is okay, but I loved her. And, it gave me the escapism down into Smuggler's Cove and, feeling as though I was one of the famous five. I didn't feel quite so alone. So I used to write stories, and that's always stayed with me. And even now, when I'm sitting in the library, I disappear inside the story that I'm writing, and I do feel as though I'm friends with those people, and I care quite deeply for them, which makes it difficult when you do get reviews. Some of the reviews for The Spirit Engineer are like, "I really love the book, and it's really good writing, but I hate William," and that is kind of the point.
Yeah,
like he is an anti-hero. You're not meant to think, "Oh, I'd love to spend an afternoon with him in the pub."
Yeah,
It'd be a nightmare. But I still care for him really deeply. I feel like I want to defend him,
Yeah, and absolutely. And the thing that I really, really enjoyed was the sort of language, and I don't know if like sort of pomp is the right word, but the way he sort of controls the house with just his sort of being there and things like that. I thought he was so spot on as a character, and obviously I don't know anything about his backstory or anything like that, but I really, really loved how he was as a character, and I thought you did it really, really well. even, I don't know if I can say it without spoiling it.
Careful.
Yeah, maybe I won't. Maybe I'll tell you afterwards. But there's something that there's one moment in it where I just thought that little thing just absolutely got him. But yeah, I'll maybe say that afterwards. So can you tell us a little bit about, from writing it, what came next? So you mentioned like agents weren't interested and things like that. What was your experiences there?
So there was so I was on Big Brother in 2016. Let's just get out there, which is a very random thing to say as an author, especially if you've actually written a book yourself. Heaven forfend. And that was a massive crash in my life. I mean, everything crashed and burned. I lost my partner. I was homeless. I had no money. I was a point of I wouldn't say public ridicule, actually, because I didn't make a fool of myself on the program. I was relatively popular, and that was fine. But it's not a good starting point to say, now I want to be a respected historical fiction novelist, right? To the point where we really deliberated, do we mention it in the book? And in the end, it was my editor who said, I really dislike that you're so embarrassed about this. It's a massive part of your life. And I actually think it's quite an interesting thing. So you need to get over that. And he forced me to kind of put it in. I'm still not sure how I feel about it. But anyway, after that, it was there was a guy who worked at a big publishing house who was also a Big Brother fan, who followed me and said, I'd really love to get some gossip on what it's really like on that program. So I thought, well, if ever there's an opportunity to get a shoe in the door in the most random way possible, that sounds like it, right? So I went for a drink with this guy and pitched a story I wanted to write. And he said, no, that's no good. That's too niche. And then I came back to him with the Spirit Engineer, and he said, okay, I think that sounds really good. So for about a year and a half, maybe 2 years, I was researching it, and then I was writing. I'm a real planner, so I took about 6 months just planning the thing, because it was so important to get everything to fit together. And then at the end of the process, me being naive, I had no agent. Someone somewhere at that Big Four publishing house didn't like it for some reason, and it just disappeared. And I was crushed, because I kind of felt like that was my only chance, to be honest, to get it published. So I was left high and dry there. And then I thought, well, okay, now I'm going to get an agent. That's the way to do it. I'll do it the normal way. Well, no agent in the country was interested in this book. The zeitgeist in historical fiction is not toxic male narrators written by men.
Yeah.
Right? It's not. In fact, that is the absolute antithesis of what agents are looking for. I got very jaded looking at agent after agent where they put their submission guidelines, and they say, really interested in historical fiction with big characters and original stories and unheard stories and unusual viewpoints. And I go, right, tick, 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 tick. And then they would say at the end, female protagonists, feminist retellings, something like that. That's what the hunger's for. It's not a criticism. It is what it is. I couldn't, and I just simply wasn't offering that with this story. And so you could just hear the delete button click the moment I sent send. Like I could not write a cover letter that was going to hide the fact that this book was the absolute opposite of what they wanted. And I got really, really frustrated about it, really down, defeatist. And I kind of gave up, to be honest. And then on Twitter, I met my husband on Twitter, by the way. I've got most of my jobs via Twitter, and I can say I got published via Twitter because I was doing a job for a charity, and then a guy followed the charity, and I looked at his profile and I saw that he was an editor at Duckworth Books, and I did some researching, and I followed him on my personal Twitter, and I said, I have a novel. Could I send it to you? And it felt to me like a last ditch. I thought, I was filling out the information that was asked of me, thinking, this is basically a waste of time. I've submitted to all of these agents. Not one of these agents, by the way, even asked for a manuscript. So for those who are aware of the process, right, it was just form response or ignored. In fact, I was at an agency thing last night, and the guy standing next to me was someone who sent me possibly one of the rudest, most clumsy form responses I ever received through that process, and hurt me so badly, and with my confidence and my drive to carry on trying to be an author so badly, because it was so offensive. And then I found myself last night standing next to this guy at a book kind of event, just thinking how much things can change, and how sad I feel for how frustrated I was back then, because I didn't need to. There was hope there, and it was hope in the shape of Duckworth Books, because I did, thank goodness, send them the information they asked. And 2 days later, they got back and said, we think it's a really, really unusual and interesting story. And we don't think, actually, that historical fiction readers do want to read identical books over and over again. We actually think they might quite appreciate something a bit different. And I feel so grateful to them for taking a massive risk and a massive punt on a book that could have been a right clanger.
Yeah,
but luckily kind of hasn't been.
Yeah, and really hasn't been. It's been everywhere. And Sean, who's one of the other co-hosts who runs the publisher that I'm published with, hates the zeitgeist, because, I mean, what's hot now might go out of fashion next week, and people who've written amazing books like yourself miss that by timing, and it's really, really unfair, I think. So I really, he and I have.
Well, it suppresses the creativity of writers, and that's an act of violence, I think. If an industry is actively suppressing the creativity of those who are creating the art in the first place, if we are teaching aspiring writers that they should begin with assimilation, then we have a serious problem. I think it's nothing short of disgusting, actually, and I think that I know it's a business, but last time I checked, it's a relatively profitable business. And in my experience working with a lot of getting to know a lot of amazing readers and online book bloggers and Instagrammers and tweeters, is they're crying out for different storylines. I mean, some people do want to just have stories that have a happy ending where the character is their best mate, and there's a place for that. Some people are looking for really dark, solemn, Thomas Hardy-esque misery, but the majority of readers, like me, actually, are just looking for a darn good story that is written with care and passion, and that's good enough. But I say this, I'm not an agent or a publisher, and I fully accept that. I think if I worked in that industry in that way, if I were myself an agent, you have to go to where the business is, I guess. You have to try and find the thing that fits with what the publishers are looking for. So there's something that's not quite right. There's something that's broken, but it's not the individuals who are to blame. It's just, I guess, the economy. It's the world, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, and it's a shame, because there are so many. I mean, indie publishers, I think, are putting out some of the most interesting stuff. Covers, your cover is absolutely incredible. I think that's something that is becoming more, I guess, with social media becoming a thing. Like, the cover is almost the thing that draws people. I know the old saying is it shouldn't, but it's such a catcher, isn't it? And your two are like unbelievable. But I generally think the people that are taking risks and not just following the same thing are putting out some of the most interesting things at the minute.
Well, I was listening to, I've been listening to other episodes, obviously, on your podcast, which is why I was excited to come on. And a couple of them mirrored conversations I've had with authors who've said, well, I was really writing what I was passionate about, but I realized I needed to get real if I wanted to be published traditionally. So I sat down and I wrote down, basically an idea that I thought would sell really well to a publisher. And then I wrote the book that went behind the idea. And to a certain degree, I had to do a bit of that myself, really. I had to package myself in a certain way and pitch the story in a certain way and knock certain corners off it to make it work. And I worked with my editor as well to make sure as well that it was going to have as much appeal as it could have. And that was part of the process. And I think that's perfectly valid. If you're struggling to get published and that is your absolute aim, I want to be published by someone else rather than publish myself, then these days the advice probably is that you should say, well, okay, what are they publishing? What do they tend to look for? It's probably something with a big twist. It's probably this kind of character. I'll give then that's what I'm going to give them. But I think ultimately the reason why my book became a bestseller is probably because it bounced against a lot of those tropes, and I'm quite proud of that.
As you should be. Yeah, absolutely. I've got a few questions from Twitter, some really interesting questions. Some of them about book 2, which we'll come to in a while. Please can you tell us about your writing process? So Alina, Book Nerd Cafe, has said, tell us more about your writing process. Do you have a favorite place to write? Music or no music? Snacks? And then also what inspires you, which I guess is a kind of separate question. So what does your writing day look like?
Hi, Alina. That's a good question. This is an obsession with snacks. And I'm so boring. I don't have snacks while I write. In fact, I forget to eat. That's one of the bad things I have. Is I'll sit down. So my writing day at the moment, with the Spirit Engineer, it was anywhere I could find space. So my then boyfriend, then fiance, lived when I started writing the book in a little living room in a shared kind of studenty type house in Clapham in London, and so I used to sit on the bed and try and write when I could, if not in a local cafe. And it was quite difficult. And I used to fit that around whatever I was doing at the time to try and scrape enough money for rent. Now I write in the London Library on St James's Square, which is where Bram Stoker wrote and researched Dracula, and Charles Dickens was on the board when it was set up. And you're surrounded by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle looks down on me probably does look down on me actually, but looks down at me from a picture on the wall. Some of the most amazing writers throughout history have been there, have researched there, have used it. So that's where I sit, in this big old Victorian building, where I had the other day there was like Joseph Knox. Has he been on your podcast?
Yeah, he headlined our first festival. Yeah.
True crime story. Well, anyway, he was sat over one side of the room. Jesse Burton was sat over the other side. Max Hastings. It was the most extraordinary thing looking around. So anyway, I sit in front of my laptop, and I get there at about 10 o'clock in the morning, and I'm there until closing. So sometimes that's at 9 p.m. So I can go for a full 12, 13 hours of writing. And there have been times when I've just barely even looked up, and I can't stand. My legs have gone dead. My spine is in a state of, it's turned to stone. It's ossified. And I just kind of hobble out looking like a cross between Miriam Margolyes and Nosferatu, trying to find my way into the light, barely able to work out how a traffic light works. But I love that, because I've just completely and utterly lost myself in what I'm writing and the story that I'm telling, and spending time with my characters. And I find 1700s London, where my next book is set, I find that for me a much happier place than 2022 London, frankly.
Yeah, agreed. And then, I mean, can you tell us a little bit about book 2?
No, I've been. The thing is, I'm very loose-lipped, and I've been told by my agent I mustn't, because apparently there are authors who genuinely do steal ideas and then write them really quickly. That happens. Apparently, I guess. I mean, I suppose it does. So that's why apparently we're not. I'm not really meant to say what it's about. It's set in Georgian London, which makes it sound very unoriginal for a historical fiction novel. I think probably 70% of historical fiction novels are set in Georgian times, and particularly Georgian London. But it's looking at a world within Georgian London that really hasn't been written about very much at all, and has been hidden, and is still not part of public consciousness, really. It's an extremely dangerous world, but beautiful at the same time in its own way. And so I've been researching that in some great detail, and it's heartbreaking, and I have been crying. I'm a bit of a crier. So I've been crying in the library writing that at times, but also laughing as well. But it's a more intense story. I set out to write The Spirit Engineer thinking it'd be quite a caper and quite a lark, frankly, and then it turned into this it's quite dark at times, right?
Yeah.
It's quite heavy.
Yeah.
And I thought with this one, I thought, well, the next one's going to be just, zippity doodah. And actually, it's it's torn me apart writing it so far. I'm 3/4 of the way through. I haven't even got to the end yet. So I think it's going to be equally intense.
Do you know the ending, how it's going to end?
Yeah, so my writing process is definitely to plan. I feel as though that's important for me. I would have to be far more intelligent than I am to be able to build towards the twists and the turns that I like to have at the ending of my story, and place the little clues and the tiny little details, the little whispers as to what's really happening. I don't think I'd have the wherewithal to be able to manage that properly and still tell a story and still give my characters a recognizable arc and still make it feel like the world is real and all of those other things you have to do as a novelist.
Yeah.
So that when that last bit lands, when the last page is turned, hopefully the reader feels really satisfied and really confident that the person who's told the story knew what they were doing. Some of the books I've loved the most, but found the most frustrating sometimes has been when I've got to the last bit or the last page, and I feel like they've really enjoyed telling a story, but just weren't quite sure how it was going to end, or maybe just said, "Oh, you decide." And I'm like, "No, I didn't come here to decide how your story ends." It's like a pilot. It's like a pilot taking you like 100 feet from the runway and then making you parachute out and go, "You do the rest. I can't be bothered." No, land the plane. God damn you! I've read 200 pages of your writing. Tell me what happens. What happens to this character? I've spent bloody hours with this character.
Yeah.
And now you leave me high and dry. I had that with The Crimson Petal and the White to a certain extent. One of my favorite books I've ever read. And I think from what I remember, it kind of ends. I mean, I don't want to spoil it for people, but it doesn't end with an absolute slap bang. That's it. It's very open, which is beautiful in its own sense. But for me, anyway, maybe it's my undiagnosed ADHD, but I do like to feel as though there's closure.
I think so. I think most people would prefer that. Karen asks, can you tell us, me, them, don't know, about Bookmark Charity?
Oh, the Bookmark Charity, yes. I'm very pleased to work with them. I'm just going through training now to be a volunteer, actually. They support children who are needing help to learn to read, basically. That's the main tranche of what they do. So they have volunteers that go into schools and also work online with kids, middle school age, who are struggling with their literacy, and just sitting with them and giving them, I think, a little bit of encouragement and attention that they need, and I was quite an academic kid at school, but I struggled with so many other things, that a little bit of kindness or attention from an adult made a world of difference, and I've always remembered that. So Bookmark Charity are worth a follow on social media for a start. Go and look on their website and find out more. They're also running a brilliant campaign at the moment. I think they're looking to give out 6,000 book boxes to Ukrainian families, so that Ukrainian children coming to the UK can read and learn some English and just find comfort in books, and that families can help support them and make them feel at home in a new and scary place. And I think that's really moving. They Bookmark Charity were our charity for the book party, which is an event that I organise with my co-director Victoria Hyde from Insta Book Tours. Can I plug them too?
Yeah, absolutely can. Yeah.
Talking about my author journey, I would not have been able to make a success of my book without Insta Book Tours and Vic. She introduced me to so many book bloggers and Instagrammers and tweeters and just readers generally. And if anyone out there listening, whether you're a published author or an aspiring author, you're self-published, the one bit of advice I would definitely give you is engage. And it doesn't take anything clever. You don't have to have amazing reels or You don't have to be amazingly beautiful or, own 12 pug dogs. You can just post, engage, comment, follow people. A little direct message goes a long, long way. Just interact with people as a normal human being. The mistake I think a lot of authors make is they are friends with lots of other authors on Twitter and Instagram and things, and they all talk to each other about their journey and their aspirations and how things are going, and that's really important. But other authors can only help you so much, really. If you're wanting to engage with your readers, you need to talk to your readers, and that's what I've learned. And without that community of people through Instabook tours and through my own engagement, like I say, I wouldn't be anywhere. They've been a huge support for me.
No.
There's no way I would have been able to get my book out there, because Duckworth, God bless him, it's not, there was no £1 million marketing budget for my book. I mean, I won't say how much I think it is, but let's just say it was, I spent 300 quid of my own money, just trying to get my Facebook post out there.
Yeah.
So
I think it's one of
that would be my advice.
Meeting readers. The first Harrogate last year was my first sort of big festival that I'd been to. My first book came out in February 2020, literally just before everything closed down. So that was my first time of being out there, and just the thought that this person talking to me has spent an hour or a couple of hours or whatever in a world that I've created almost, I just think it's the most ridiculous cool thing in the world. And yeah, conversing with those people and spending time is amazing. So yeah, I absolutely agree with you.
It's a huge compliment to you, and I think that a lot of readers don't quite realize how much they mean actually to authors. And I was saying that at the book party just gone this last weekend, the people who came up and said, thank you so much for writing this book. It's a lovely thing to say, but I thought, how do you put into words what it means to me that you've just said that?
Yeah.
I don't know, because it's so hard to sound sincere, isn't it? Like the usual things keep coming out. You keep using the word, you use the word thrilled, or the usual things that authors always say. And I think, no, think of what does it really mean? And I don't know. I just try and explain to them that, if the kid version of me, if the little boy version of me knew that one day someone would buy my book from a bookshop and tell me they liked it, it would be unimaginably exciting. And I still feel that inside.
Yeah. And I think they generally do know, I think it's sort of always written on your face, just how much of a thrill it is, even though, that word again. But yeah, I absolutely agree. At this point, Rob Parker usually asks, if you had to write in a different genre, what would you write in?
I would write I don't know, what would kind of PG Wodehouse fall into? I would write kind of PG Woodhouseian, kind of light-hearted ribaldry and kind of satire.
Yeah.
I might actually, I think I might branch into doing some of that. I'd quite like to write kind of weighty tomes, but then also write some lighter stuff, maybe under a different version of my name. I wouldn't want to write under a totally different name, but maybe Andy West for the lighter hearted stuff and AJ West for the more serious stuff. But yeah, no, that's probably what I would write, I think.
Yeah, great idea. And on that, why AJ West? Are we allowed to ask that?
You're very much allowed to ask it. I hate my name, Andy West. I hate it. I've always hated my name. I've just always felt like it's just not my name. I can't pronounce Andrew because, as you just heard, I pronounce it with a J rather than a DR. It is a strange speech impediment, so I can't really call myself Andrew because I annoy myself every time I say it. And also my publisher said it'd be good to call yourself AJ West so that people in shops don't realise quite so instantly that you're a man. Because that will turn off readers. Some readers don't like reading books written by men. I think through hard in historical fiction anyway. I think through hard-earned experience, perhaps, that it tends to enjoy rather too many heaving bosoms, or I don't know what particular the reason is. I mean, I'm a fully signed up homosexual, so I'm not fussed about heaving bosoms in the way some men might be. It's probably a bosoms free zone. But so that's the reason why. But I hate it, and I'm not sure I like AJ West, but I am where I am. Yeah. I thought about calling myself a couple of other names, but my husband said you can't call yourself that, and the publisher weren't keen on the other one, so here we are. But it's the whole initial surname thing. I think for me is just I like bucking trends, and I feel as though I've kind of slipped unwittingly into a cliche a little bit, but who cares who writes the book? It's the book that matters, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I absolutely agree. You talked about an idea that you pitched before, the spirit engineer, that the person wasn't keen on. Is that something that you would go back to? Do you think it's got potential, or have you sort of thought, nah, actually?
Well, the person that I was talking to, I hold in very high regard, and I would never criticize them for it. But it was sage advice, perhaps at the time, but perhaps advice you wouldn't get today, which was because it was a book about gay characters, and the advice I was given was you'll be stuck in the queer fiction bit at the back of the shop, and you won't sell enough copies, and the big publishers, for that reason, are unlikely to be very interested. I think there's been a big change now in that. I think there's a will now to present stories that we'll talk about different lives and different lived experiences. Shuggie Bain obviously had a big impact on that. I don't doubt Heartstopper in YA has had a huge impact too. Whether it all translates into book sales is something that we'll have to wait and see. But I as a gay man, I've always been quite cautious of. I don't want to be seen as a gay author. I want to be seen as an author who is gay. If I can put it that way around.
Yeah.
So I'm actually quite pleased. I think it wasn't bad advice, actually. I'm quite pleased that I've been able to establish myself as an author with a story that isn't about my particular liking for penises. I can come to that later in my career if I so choose. But
absolutely,
because you can find yourself pigeonholed so easily, can't you?
Definitely.
In any industry, but I think in this industry you certainly can. You're right. I feel like if my first book had been along those lines and had been successful, then definitely the expectation would be the next one has to be.
Yeah. Which it shouldn't be, but yeah, I absolutely get that. You can write yourself into a niche, or that's what people come to expect.
Do you find that? Is that something that you think about in your writing career when you're thinking, okay, what am I going to write next? Do you give consideration to that?
Probably not as much as I should. I've been so my first three were like sort of police procedurals, because that's what I enjoyed reading, and I'd sort of had an idea about a decade ago about a thing, but I'd always thought like people like me don't do writing. That's like someone else. Like, writers are my heroes. I've said it before. And then one day I just thought, well, I'll start and see where it goes. And so I did 3 of those, and then it was a bit heavy, so I started writing a bit of cozy crime, did some little novellas, and then I wrote a PI novel. So I'm sort of just, I probably should think more about a strategy, but I kind of just think, I fancy that now.
Yeah, well, you're quite that's good, isn't it? You're kind of quite free with it, and I've tried to do that with my second book. I'm definitely sticking with historical fiction because I need it to be. I just get so much pleasure from writing historical fiction, and I've always wanted to go back to Old London Bridge, with the shops and the buildings teetering over the edge of the roaring cataracts and the rapids and the boat zipping through and crashing and all this kind of stuff. So, and the stink of the shit. I've always wanted to be there in that crush of a city. So I had to go back into historical fiction, but I was very careful to try and make sure that I found a true life story that I could research and base the next book on. that really bore no relation to the previous one. So there's, you know, there are no ghosts, no spirits, no spirit mediums, and the characters are very, very different characters, slightly less solemn, much brighter. It's we have a hero rather than an anti-hero, a very lovable lead character, I hope. So I've tried to change it up, because I think you have to kind of keep your muscles supple, otherwise you do find yourself. I could imagine myself in book like 4 or 5, if I was just kept writing kind of ghost stories. By book 4 or 5 I'd be like, I can't write another dark room with a ghost in it. I just can't, because there's only so many ways you can do that. And I really enjoy testing my own use of language and finding out new ways to describe things. And sometimes I get it right and sometimes I get it wrong, but I hate describing things in the same way over and over again.
Yeah. And I absolutely agree. The question, so we talked about your characters earlier. Your setting of Belfast, obviously, I know Belfast quite well, but from nowadays, I've not lived in Northern Ireland for like 10 years now, but it's a Belfast that obviously is from 100 years ago, but it felt so vivid. And I was just wondering while I was reading it, what, like, was that just photos, or how did you get it so right and vivid?
Well, William Jackson Crawford is a respectable man living in grey, rainy, bitingly cold, grim, but at the same time filled with gorgeous, brilliant humor and great, vibrant characters, who goes on a journey into madness and ignominy and loses his security. Without spoilers, I can put it in broad terms.
Yeah.
And his mind, and that's so did I. You know, the book is not the book. It has a biographical element to it. I lived in that city. I walked through those rainy streets. I know the color of the sky. I know the way the light changes when you're inside those buildings, the grey light. I know how cozy that city can feel as well when you're ensconced inside a softly lit room and the world is outside. And I know with your wonderful accent, and I miss it, actually. I miss being surrounded by the humor, the dry humor, the sarcasm, the wit, but also the aggression that someone can say, hello, how are you? But in Northern Ireland, if you didn't understand the language, it could sound like a threat.
Yeah.
You know, the friendliest people sound the most threatening.
Yeah.
And it's something to get you to that. Hello, how are you? How are you?
And it's like,
yeah, exactly. What? And I actually love that, and I miss that actually now. And so for me, I got kind of booted out of Northern Ireland because I got sacked by the BBC because I took issue with a decision they'd made around gay rights, and I was the first openly gay newsreader on BBC Northern Ireland on television. And without getting into the ins and outs of it, you can Google it. I took issue with something and ended up doing the impossible, which is get sacked by the BBC, because no one gets sacked by the BBC. I mean, literally no one, ever. You just get moved sideways and given a pay increase. But I managed to actually get sacked. I did the impossible. And that's how I ended up on Big Brother. But I went through a massive breakdown. You know, I lost everything. And I walked around those streets and I listened to those voices and I saw those buildings. And, you know, walked along the side of the Lagan and looked across to where they would have been building, where they did build the Titanic famously, but, you know, the shipyards. So if it felt real to you, then that's a huge compliment, because it certainly felt damn real to me. Because I was writing it at distance in London, kind of still dealing with the fact that I felt in my heart as though I was still in Northern Ireland. It was such a shock. It was such a whip snap shock that I found myself leaving Northern Ireland, leaving the BBC, going into Big Brother, coming out the other end, spat out the other end in a complete mess. covered in celebrity phlegm, and then trying to make sense of who the hell I was. And for me, going back to Belfast it almost felt like going back somewhere safe.
Yeah.
And because it was 100 years earlier, it was safe. It wasn't my Belfast, the one that I'd felt hurt by, or hurt in, I should say. But it was familiar. It was a very, very long answer to your question, but that's the truth. I knew it in my mind. And when I've got a book on Belfast trams and where all the lines were, so I knew the routes the trams took, and to escape into Belfast of old. Oh, and William's workplace, I have to say, if you go on my website, ajwestauthor.com, there's a video of it. William's workplace, the reason I know the way his shoes sounded on the floors in the corridors and the way people's voices sounded in those long corridors is because they're still there, and I basically trespassed and broke my way in. They're student halls now, but this big old clanging, echoing Edwardian stone building with these ringing corridors and this huge hall, and I stood in the exact classrooms and laboratories that William Jackson Crawford stood in. Yes, they'd had like plasterboard rooms put in them and everything, but you could still see the ceilings. And when you walked up and down the corridors, I could still hear my shoes on the terrazzo floor. And I deliberately wore kind of smart shoes so that I could hear how his footsteps would sound and how a ghost's footsteps would sound, and would there have been echoes. So in answer to your question, it's a very important location for me, and I just nerded out really. I think while my life was in disarray, I found safety in my research.
Amazing. And we usually end on what are you reading right now?
Okay, I am reading. Well, I don't know if it's a very exciting answer really, to be honest, but I can get it. 1 second. I don't read fiction when I'm writing fiction.
No, a lot of people say that.
I just can't. Well, the writing's either too bad or too good. Either way, it doesn't help.
Yeah.
I can't stand it when I pick up a book and I'm like, if someone sends me a book saying, oh, this new historical fiction novel's out, would you like to read it and tweet about it or whatever? I always say yes, but I read it with this grimace thinking I could never write that, and then I think I just suddenly feel very inadequate and very self-conscious, and I go back into the library the next day trying to live up to this other writer, and it never works. Anyway, so I'm reading non-fiction as research. So this is the Journal of a Georgian Gentleman, and it's the life and times of Richard Hall, 1729 to 1801. And this is one of the many, many books that I've been reading just to get a sense really of, what day-to-day lives were. Some tiny little detail will come out of this book, probably near the end, because that's just my luck, that's going to inform the story I'm telling and hopefully give the reader the same sense that you had of Belfast in The Spirit Engineer, which is that it feels real,
Yeah, and I am saying, you talk about the everyday thing. There's a bit where he's on the tram and he looks out and there are people going to work in the shipyard and they kind of lock eyes kind of thing, and it's such a little moment, but it's exactly what would have happened, and you can tell that the people in the shipyard are probably, how they're feeling about him and how he feels about them, and I think it was just really, really brilliantly done. I absolutely loved it. So yeah, thank you. And I know we said 40 minutes at the start. We've kind of gone beyond that. So thank you so much for spending your evening with me. It's been such a joy. I've been really looking forward to it, especially since I finished it a couple of weeks ago. And I mean, we said at the start, the podcasts that I enjoy the most are when people are really open and honest. And I think people will really, I don't know if respond well is the right word or whatever, but I think people will really enjoy this one because of how candid you've been. So I can only thank you for sort of opening yourself up to us.
I've really enjoyed speaking on your podcast. I love doing podcast interviews, but even the fact you just picked up on that little detail in my book there is a huge compliment to me. It's just lovely talking to people who've read the book, but also fellow writers and passionate readers. It's all just part really of the dream, I think, of being a published author that I'm still pinching myself around. And thank you for giving me your time. I hope I haven't said anything that's too obnoxious that's going to make anyone particularly hate me. But I suppose, Was it Winston Churchill who said? Winston Churchill said, "If you've..." Oh, that's my phone. Sorry, I'm just messing up the end of your podcast now.
You're absolutely fine.
That's the level of professionalism you can expect. This is why I got sacked by the BBC. Just totally unprofessional throughout. I was waffling then anyway. I'm now going to do what I do with every single podcast recording and sexual encounter, and just unpick it about everything I did wrong, and just assume that the other person hated it.
Well, I can only say from what I've experienced, and I've loved every minute, so I can only thank you.
Well, you're a generous podcast lover. Thank you.
And hopefully we will see each other at some stage for a pint in real life. It would be lovely to meet you.
I would really like that. Yeah, we must stay in touch. That would be cool. I think we'd have a lot to talk about away from the podcast recording, about Belfast, Northern Ireland, about the publishing industry, about our own experiences. I'd have a lot to learn, I think.
Absolutely. Well, I don't know about to learn, but it'd be very enjoyable. So yeah, thank you for your time, and listener, thank you for yours, and we will see you again soon. Bye bye.